The rain wasn't just falling on Ensley, it was hammering it, turning the asphalt into a black mirror under the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. I was behind the wheel of the Iron Horse, my 1978 Ford F-150, feeling every one of her years as a shudder ran through the frame. It wasn't a good shudder. "Come on, girl," I muttered, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Not here. Not tonight." The engine answered with a wet, choking gasp. The RPM needle dropped like a stone. All the lights on the dash flickered once, twice, and went dark. The familiar rumble that had been my constant companion for 15 years cut out, leaving only the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof and a silence that felt heavy and wrong. We were dead in the water, or dead in the rain, I guess, right in the middle of a dark, slicked-up street where the buildings leaned in close like they were sharing secrets I didn't want to hear. My eyes scanned the shadows between those buildings, alleyways so dark they looked like solid black. And for a second, I swore I saw those shadows move, not from the wind, a separate, sliding kind of movement. Then they emerged. A group of young men, 5 of them, materialized from the mouth of the nearest alley. They weren't running, but their walk had a purpose to it, a slow, spreading kind of advance. Their shoulders were hunched against the rain, but their postures were all tension, like coiled springs. I couldn't make out faces, just silhouettes against the distant neon of a closed-down bar. My heart was a kick drum in my chest, a frantic rhythm against the steady beat of the rain. Every instinct told me to lock the doors, to slump down in the seat, to become invisible. But the Iron Horse was a tomb now, a metal coffin waiting for them to reach it. So I took a breath, a long, slow pull of damp air that smelled of oil and wet pavement, and I made my choice. The door handle was cold in my grip. The click of the latch was deafening. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the downpour. The cold rain hit me instantly, soaking through my shirt, plastering my hair to my forehead. I stood there, beside my dead truck, the water already running in rivulets down the old fender. I made myself straighten up to meet the approaching group square on. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't reach for a pocket. I just stood my ground, the water pooling around my boots, waiting in the echoing silence between thunder rolls for whatever happened next. The Iron Horse and I, we weren't running anymore. The sun hangs heavy and orange over the rooftops of my old neighborhood, and for a moment I'm not Waylon, the retired factory man. I'm 17 again, the smell of hot asphalt and honeysuckle thick in the air. This corner wasn't always Beau's kingdom. 40 years ago it was ours. Me, Jimmy Two Shoes Harkins, and Crazy Lenny. We'd lean right where that rusted fire escape is now, watching the world roll by in a haze of summer boredom and big dreams. We spoke a language all our own back then. A car wasn't just clean, it was slicker than owl grease. A bad idea wasn't foolish, it was dumber than a box of rocks. You didn't just leave, you made dust. That's what I did eventually. Made dust for a welding torch and a steady paycheck. But I remember the codes, the unspoken rules etched deeper than any street name. You didn't look too long at another man's ride. A direct challenge was met with words first, fists only if the words failed. And respect. Respect wasn't given with fear, like Beau deals it. It was earned. It was holding the line when the shopkeeper Old Man McGregor was being hassled by out-of-towners. It was knowing which alley cat belonged to Mrs. Finney and leaving a saucer of milk out after she'd had her surgery. This place ran on a quiet economy of favors and face. I ran these streets in sneakers worn thin, thinking the whole world was contained within these 6 blocks. Our crew didn't have an iron horse back then. We had Lenny's moped, a sputtering death trap we'd all pile onto, laughing until our sides hurt as we puttered past the very warehouses Beau now uses for his operations. We were kids playing at being tough, not knowing what real toughness or real cruelty looked like. Leaving for the factory felt like growing up. Trading slang for shift schedules, alleyways for assembly lines. I thought I'd left this all behind for a quieter life. But standing here now, the memories flooding back, I realize something. You can make dust for 40 years, but some ground just waits for you to return. The rules are still here, buried under layers of neglect and fear. Beau just wrote over them in his own ugly hand. And maybe, just maybe, knowing the original text is the only advantage an old man like me has left. The sun was a white-hot coin in the Texas sky, beating down on the cracked asphalt of a town I barely recognized. I was leaning against the fender of the iron horse, my 1978 F-150, her engine silent and too hot to touch after a radiator hose gave up the ghost. I was just trying to get her some water, hoping to limp to a parts store. That's when he walked up. Beau. I didn't know his name then, but you could feel it. He had that slick, polished look of a new kind of predator, all expensive boots, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 2 of his modern crew, kids really, hung back like shadows. He didn't say hello, just started circling me and the horse, slow, like a vulture assessing a meal. "This your rig, old-timer?" he asked, his voice smooth as oil. "She's mine," I said, keeping my voice flat. I've seen his type before, just with less polish. He stopped in front of me, blocking the sun. "See, these streets here. They're under my protection. A nice, historic truck like this, drawing attention. It uses up my goodwill." He spread his hands, all fake reason. "There's a toll for that, for using my streets." A toll. My hands, resting on the warm blue paint of the horse, curled into fists. This wasn't about protection. This was a shakedown, plain and simple. He saw a stranded old man in a broken-down classic, and he saw an easy score. My eyes flickered past him to the weathered auto shop across the street. Through the grimy, barred window, I saw a face. My breath caught. Rhett, older, heavier, with a tiredness etched deep around his eyes. My old ally, my running buddy from 100 moons ago. Our eyes met for just a second, a flash of recognition, then a flood of something else. Fear. He looked from me to Beau and then back down at the counter in front of him. He didn't wave. He didn't come out. He just turned away, disappearing into the gloom of his shop. That hurt, a sharp sting right under the ribs. But looking at the bars on his windows, I understood. Beau wasn't just a bully. He was the law here now. And Rhett had a business, maybe a family, to lose. Beau followed my gaze, then chuckled, a low, nasty sound. Smart man. He knows how things work. He leaned in, his cologne too sweet. So, the toll. Let's say 200 for the inconvenience. The iron horse sat silent between us, a relic of a time when a handshake and a man's word meant something. Now I was just an old man on a broken street, with a ghost in a window and a vulture picking at my pockets. The tension wasn't in my fists anymore. It was in the air, thick and hot, waiting for the spark. The sound of metal scraping against metal is one of the worst noises you can hear when it's your truck. It's the sound of violation. Beau's boys, a couple of wiry guys with more nerve than sense, had their crowbars under the edge of the iron horse's driver's side door, starting to pry. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it wanted out, but I made my face a blank wall. Pleading with a man like Beau is like pouring gasoline on a fire. It just makes him burn hotter. Showing fear is the same thing. So I didn't. Instead, I pushed myself off from where I'd been standing. I took 2 slow steps and leaned my hip against the front fender, right by the headlight. The old Ford's steel was cool and solid through my jeans. I crossed my arms, real casual, and I just looked at Beau, not at the guys with the bars, not at the truck, right at him. He was grinning, waiting for me to break, to start begging. I let the silence hang for a beat, just long enough for that grin to get a little unsure at the edges. Then I spoke. My voice didn't shake. It came out low and steady, dripping with the old neighborhood slang I hadn't used in years. It was the language of front porches and chain-link fences of a time before all this. "Y'all fixin' to jack a man's horse?" I saw the words hit him. Horse, not truck. Jack, not steal. It was a whole different world. I kept my eyes locked on his. "That ain't how we did it." I let that we sit there, heavy with a history he probably knew nothing about. "We helped a brother. You saw a man broken down on the side of the road. You stopped. You offered a tow, a jump, a ride to the parts store. You didn't strip him for scraps." The scraping sound had stopped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy with the crowbar straighten up, looking from me to Beau, confused. The other one just held his tool, unsure. My words, my tone, it wasn't what they were expecting. They were braced for a fight, for tears, for curses. They weren't braced for a history lesson delivered in a calm, dead-serious drawl. The iron horse sat silent between us, a witness. Beau's smirk was completely gone now, replaced by a tight, calculating look. He was trying to figure me out, to see if this was a bluff or some kind of trap. The rules of his game were simple. Take what you want. I just introduced a whole old rusty set of rules he didn't understand, and for a second, just a second, it threw everything off balance. The night got quieter, and the only thing moving was the confused glance between his 2 crew members. The kid's question hung in the air, a thin, sharp hook. How he did it. He couldn't have been more than 19, all clean lines and new boots, looking at me like I was a story in a book he hadn't finished. Beau was watching from the shadow of the warehouse door, his silence a heavier pressure than any shout. I felt Rhett shift beside me, a barely there movement of solidarity. This was the opening. It wasn't about answering the question. It was about proving the question itself belonged to me. I took a slow drag from my cigarette, letting the smoke curl out into the damp evening. I didn't look at the kid. Instead, I turned my head, my eyes tracing the grimy brick wall of the old machine shop next door. "See that?" I said, my voice gravelly and low. I pointed with my chin. "Up there, by the rusted fire escape. The crown with the dagger through it." The kid and a couple others squinted. It was just a faded blue ghost of paint, almost eaten by weather and time. "Crown Point Crew," I said, the name feeling old on my tongue. "Ran these 6 blocks back in '92. Their lieutenant, a guy called Mako, put that there after they took the shop from the Red Hands. He used a ladder from the old 5 and dime. Cops came while he was still up there. He jumped from the second rung, broke his ankle, and still outran them. I flicked my ash. They found him 2 days later, holed up in the boiler room of the elementary school. I started walking, a slow amble along the wall. They followed, a loose, quiet pack. Beau hadn't moved. "That there," I pointed to a swirling, abstract mess of silver that looked like nothing. "That's not graffiti. That's the signature of the Hightower boys. They'd tag the spots where they'd hidden contraband before a raid. A map only they could read. That one's from '98, I think. Means there was a stash of motorcycle parts buried in a PVC pipe right about—" I scuffed my boot in the gravel. "Here." The kid stared at the spot, then back at the wall, his earlier skepticism melting into something like awe. I kept going, a somber tour guide. I named the Phantom Riders, the Loomis Street Boys, crews whose names were now just echoes and cautionary tales. I pointed out the overlapping layers of paint, the history of territory written in rust and fading color. I wasn't just a guy with an old truck. With every name, every date, every small, true detail of a story they'd only heard fragments of, I was weaving myself into the brick and mortar of the place. I was proving my roots were dug into this same poisoned soil. Finally, I stopped and looked straight at the young one. "You don't learn how we did it from asking," I said, my voice quiet but carrying. "You learn it from knowing what they did, and knowing what it cost." I let my gaze drift past him, meeting Beau's eyes in the gathering dark. I wasn't passing through. I was a piece of the landscape, and he was just starting to realize it. The air in the shop went dead still. Beau's voice, that slick, sneering tone, had finally cut through the last of the grease and nostalgia hanging in the space. He was holding a heavy steel wrench, tapping it against his palm like a judge's gavel. "Times have changed, old man," he said, taking a step toward the front of the iron horse. "My iron horse? Your stories about the good old days don't pay my bills." I felt my jaw tighten. I could see Rhett from the corner of my eye, frozen by the workbench, his usual easy smile gone. The other guys, the younger crew Beau had brought in, were just watching. Some looked uncomfortable, others just curious. This was their show now, apparently, but then Beau raised the wrench. He wasn't just talking anymore. He took another step, his eyes locked on the windshield of the '78 Ford, that original, slightly pitted glass I'd wiped clean 1,000 times. "Maybe you need a clearer picture of how things work now," he spat. That's when it happened, that cold, metallic click in my soul. The iron horse wasn't just a truck. It was every dawn I'd met to get to a job site, every honest dollar I'd ever earned, every calloused hand and sore back that built something real. It was proof, and he was about to smash its face in as a lesson. My feet moved before my brain could catch up. I didn't run, I just placed myself. One solid step put me between Beau and the truck's grill. "You put that down, Beau." My voice came out lower and steadier than I felt. It wasn't a shout. It was just a fact. "You're not touching this truck." He blinked, the wrench still held high. "Or what? You gonna tell me another story?" "No," I said, my eyes never leaving his. "The talking's done." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just shock. It was a shift. I saw it on the faces of the watching crew. A few of them looked from Beau's raised wrench to the old truck, to me standing there in my worn boots. They were here for a paycheck, sure, but this was something else. This was disrespect for the tool, for the craft itself. And in a shop, even a changing one, that still means something. Beau saw it too. I watched his confidence waver for the first time. His eyes darted to his men, looking for the backup he assumed he had. He didn't find it. He just found witnesses. He lowered the wrench, not all the way, but the threat was gone. It was just a heavy piece of metal in his hand now. The line had been drawn, and he'd been the one to cross it. And everyone in that bay had seen exactly what was on the other side. The sun was a hammer on the back of my neck as I stood in the dust between my house and Beau's. The iron horse, my '78 F-150, sat silent behind me, its primer gray hood a testament to the work still needed. This couldn't be won with fists. Not today. I had to be smarter. I saw Rhett's silhouette in his upstairs window across the street, a barely there nod. That was all I needed. "Beau!" I called out, my voice cutting through the humid afternoon quiet. He turned from his porch, his smirk already in place, his two buddies flanking him like bored guard dogs. "I've got a proposition for you." He sauntered over, kicking a pebble. "What? You finally come to your senses? Handing over the keys to that scrap heap?" "Not a chance," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm challenging you, but not to a fight, to a test. A bet." That got his interest. His eyebrows went up. "A bet?" "Real neighborhood knowledge," I said, tapping my temple. "The stuff that ain't in books. The OG stuff. You win, the title to the iron horse is yours. I sign it over clean." His eyes flicked to the truck, greed plain on his face. "And if you win?" "You and your crew help me fix her up. Full day's honest work. No sabotage, no funny business." He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You're on. What's the test? Naming the mayor from 1985? "Better." I pointed down the street. 3 street corner markings, faded ones mostly gone, places only someone who's lived here, really lived here, would know the meaning of. You identify what they meant, you win. Beau puffed out his chest. "Easy. I've walked every inch of this place." "First one," I said, leading the way down to the corner of Elm and Fifth. I knelt, brushing away some dry grass. There, nearly eroded into the concrete, was a faint, chiseled X with a tiny circle in the center. What was this? Not a utility mark. What did it mean to the guys who put it here? Beau stared. He crouched, squinting. His buddies shuffled. Old property line?" he guessed. "Wrong," I said softly. "That was Old Man Miller's marker. The circle meant water access agreed. He let the whole block tap his well during the '81 drought, a sign of trust." Beau's smirk faded. "Next one," he snapped. I walked us 2 blocks over to the alley behind the old bakery. On the crumbling brick corner, almost invisible, were 3 parallel vertical scratches. "These." He ran his fingers over them, thinking. "Kids? Some kind of tally?" 3 scratches. For the 3 stray dogs Old Lady Green used to feed right here, every single night for 10 years. The neighborhood knew to drive slow here at dusk. Beau was sweating now. He looked back toward his house, then at Rhett's window. Rhett was just a shadow, but I felt his steady gaze. "Last one," Beau said, his voice tight. I took him to the oldest spot, the cracked foundation of the first community center that burned down. There at the very base was the faintest impression of a horseshoe, open side up. "This one," he knelt, silent for a full minute. "Luck," he finally muttered. "For good luck on the building." "Not just luck," I corrected, my own voice thick. "That was put there by my granddad. The horseshoe points up to hold the goodness for everyone who entered. It's a covenant, a promise to take care of your own." I straightened up, looking down at Beau, still crouched in the dirt by the ghost of a horseshoe. The truth was written in the slump of his shoulders. He didn't know. He knew the streets, but not the stories, not the soul. He stood up, brushing grit from his knees, not meeting my eye. He glanced at his silent crew, then back at the distant, waiting shape of the iron horse. "Tomorrow," he said, the word gritted out like a confession. "We start at 8. He turned and walked away, his boys following. I looked up at Rhett's window. The curtain fell back into place. The trap had sprung, and it was knowledge, not muscle, that had won the day. The iron horse was staying right where she belonged. The air under that flickering streetlight felt thick enough to cut with a knife. The whole crew was there, a half circle of shadowed faces, with a few porch lights from the neighbors' houses cutting through the dark. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. Beau stood by the driver's side door of the iron horse, that smug, permanent smirk plastered on his face like he'd already won. He'd been holding court, talking about the old codes and territory marks some of the original founders had scratched into the truck's frame. "It's a map," he'd said, his voice all confidence. "A map to the real power around here. And I'm the only one who can read it." Rhett caught my eye from across the hood, giving me a single, almost imperceptible nod. He'd backed me into this corner, and now I had to climb out. I stepped forward, the gravel crunching under my boots. "A map, Beau?" I said, my voice quieter than his, but it carried in the still night. "You sure about that?" He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Waylon, don't embarrass yourself. This is grown-up talk." I ignored him. I walked to the rear wheel well, the spot where the paint was worn down to bare, rust-speckled metal. I ran my fingers over the series of notches, dots, and crude symbols I'd spent weeks cross-referencing in old shop manuals and my granddad's journals. "This cluster here," I said, pointing to 3 shallow gouges in a triangle. "That's not a landmark. That's a danger signal. It means bad fuel source or a dishonest mechanic. Old man Grady put this on after he nearly got swindled out in Lubbock in '82. I moved my finger an inch to the left. "These crossed lines? That's an alliance marker. It means this truck was welcome at Jed Carter's barn without question. A sign of trust, not territory." I kept going, my voice gaining strength. A single X for a friend who'd passed on the road. A series of dots that counted the number of times the transmission had been rebuilt. A badge of honor, not a secret. Each mark, I explained, was a story of hardship, of brotherhood, of loss, not of power. Beau's smirk had vanished. He was just staring, first at the truck, then at the crew. I saw their faces changing in the flickering light. They weren't looking at Beau anymore. They were looking at the iron horse, and they were looking at me. "You said it was a map to control people," I finished, finally turning to face him fully. "But it's not. It's a memorial. It's a record. It's the history of every man who relied on this machine, written in scratches only someone who cares about the history would bother to learn. You don't want to understand it, Beau. You just wanted to use it." The silence was absolute, broken only by the buzz of the faulty streetlight. Beau opened his mouth, but nothing came out. No slick retort, no arrogant deflection. He was completely exposed, a man who didn't speak the language standing in front of the very people who did. I didn't need to say another word. I just looked at Rhett, and he gave me a real smile this time. The respect in the circle hadn't just shifted, it had settled. And it wasn't anywhere near Beau. It was right here, with this old truck, and with the truth. The air in the salvage yard was dead still, thick with the smell of oil and rust. I stood there, my hand resting on the fender of the iron horse, feeling the sun-warmed metal under my palm. Beau was still posturing, his face red, spitting threats about who owned what and who gave the orders. But his voice had lost its bite. It was just noise now. Then something shifted. The youngest guy on Beau's crew, a kid with grease under his nails and a curious look in his eyes, just ignored him. He walked right past Beau like he was a ghost and went to the front of my truck. He looked at me, then at the hood latch. I gave a single nod. That was all it took. The spell was broken. Another guy followed, then the whole crew. They surrounded the iron horse, and Beau was left standing alone, his mouth still moving, but no one listening. It was the quietest defeat I'd ever seen. "Pop the hood, would you?" I said, my voice calm. The kid did. The familiar V8 engine lay exposed, a little dusty, but honest. Beau had made it sound like it needed a full rebuild, some impossible, expensive fix only he could manage. I leaned in, Rhett right beside me, a solid, silent presence. I didn't need a manual. I knew this engine like I knew my own heartbeat. "See that?" I said, pointing with a grimy finger. "The positive cable off the solenoid. It's just hanging on by a thread. Ain't getting a good bite." The crew crowded in, looking. It wasn't some mystical problem. It was simple, basic. The kid reached in with a wrench. "Just snug it down?" he asked. "Give it a quarter turn," I directed. "Don't strip it, just till she's home." He did. It took less than a minute. The click of the wrench was louder than anything Beau had said in the last hour. I looked at Rhett. "Key in it?" Rhett slid into the driver's seat, turned the key. The iron horse didn't just start, it roared. A deep, healthy, rumbling roar that echoed off the piles of scrap metal. It was the sound of truth. I turned around to face Beau, but he was already gone. I just caught a glimpse of his shadow slipping between two stacks of crushed cars, melting back into the junk from whence he came. He wasn't chased out. He wasn't beaten out. He was simply made irrelevant. His authority was broken, not by my fist, but by my knowing what he did not, the simple, honest language of the machine he tried to claim. The iron horse idled smoothly, purring like a contented lion. The crew stood around, smiling awkwardly, shuffling their feet. The knowledge that had been my burden was now my victory. It was over, and my truck was finally coming home. The old starter groaned, then caught, and the iron horse let out a low, rumbling roar that shook the dust from its fenders. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 20 years, the deep, steady heartbeat of my past. I turned off the engine for a moment, letting the silence in the garage feel complete. I looked at the young crew standing around, their hands stained with grease and their faces tired but bright. They'd done more than fix a truck. They'd listened. I walked up to the lead kid, the one who'd found the cracked rotor. No money changed hands. Instead, I offered my hand, a real, firm grip, calloused palm to calloused palm, and gave him a single, solid nod. He nodded back, understanding passing between us without a word. I did the same with the others. It was the old way. A man's thanks, straight and true, meant more than any bill. I climbed up into the cab, the worn vinyl seat creaking a familiar welcome. The scent of old oil, gasoline, and memories filled the space. I turned the key again, and the iron horse awoke, ready to move. I drove slowly out of Ensley, the truck's engine a contented purr now, not a scream. The town blurred past my window, a mix of the unchanged and the unfamiliar. And then there it was, Rhett's auto. The bay door was open, and I could see him inside, wiping his hands on a rag, a silhouette against the work light. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. As I rolled past, I turned my head. Rhett looked up at the sound of the truck, his eyes finding mine through the passenger window. Time seemed to fold in on itself. We were boys again, just for a second, before life and Beau and years of silence came between us. Then we were just two old men, worn down but still standing. He gave a slow, knowing nod. I returned it, my hand lifting just slightly from the wheel. And that was it. No grand speech, no tears, just a nod that said everything. It's over. He's gone. We're still here. I drove on, leaving Ensley in my rear view. The villain was gone, not just from the town, but from the corners of my mind he'd haunted. The road stretched out ahead, smooth and open. The iron horse carried me forward, a piece of my past now rolling steadily into my present. I had reclaimed more than metal and rubber. I'd reclaimed a piece of myself. And in a dusty garage back there, I'd passed on a sliver of its code, a lesson in respect, in grit, in the things that last. The peace I felt wasn't loud or exciting. It was quiet, deep, and settled right into my bones, as solid and real as the steering wheel in my hands.